This is the second video on the passive voice from Ecce Romani chapter 30, pages 23 and 24 if you're following along with your book. Just to recap briefly from the first video, the basic difference between the active and the passive voice. On the left-hand side, we have the active voice with a sentence, I hit the ball, where our subject is I, the active verb is hit, and we have ball that's a direct object. We have this image with the arrow pointing to the subject, I, and I perform that action of that verb. I do the hitting. So the basic definition of verbs that are active is a verb where the subject performs that action of the verb. On the right, the passive voice, the basic definition of that, the subject receives the action of the verb. It's acted upon, or it is the recipient. Our example, the ball is hit by me. The subject of that sentence is ball, but the ball physically does nothing. The ball is hit. So we can see there it receives that action. It's acted upon, and it's acted upon by me. We call that the agent. That is the person that actually performs the action, but, very important, not the subject. Subject here is ball. So in a passive sentence with a passive verb, we have a subject, a verb, and an agent, whereas in an active voice sentence, we're going to more likely have a subject, a verb, and a direct object. Here's a chart. This is on page 24 of your book, and it lists the present, imperfect, and future tenses of our four verbs that we've seen, porto, moveo, mitto, and iaceo, and audio, but they're passive. So you can see there in the top, the present passive, our endings, auritur, mur, miniuntur, are placed on the end of the present stem plus a vowel. We still have the vowel of A in the first conjugation, long E in the second, a short I in the third, and a long I in the fourth. A couple things to note. If you look at the third conjugation, second person singular, right here, that E, we would actually expect that to be an I, based on the fact that everything else is I. But I is a weak vowel, and here that's going to become E instead, so it's miteris. And then for an IO verb, it's the same thing, iacaris. That's present tense, so be careful, because sometimes if you see an E, you might think it's future tense. It's not. If you look below, we have a long E. That tells us we have a future tense. Also, one more place where this happens is in the first and second conjugations, second person singular, in the future tense. So portaberis, instead of biris, we would expect from bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitus, but to get bor, biris, bitur, but it's bor, beris, bitur, bimor, bimini, buntur. Same thing here in the second conjugation. Move, beris would be you will be moved. Again, this chart's on page 24. You want to spend some time looking at this, memorizing these forms. You're going to see them a lot, but again, basically the common trends that we've already seen in active verbs hold true here. In the present tense, we want to be looking at what vowel we have. That'll tell us our conjugation. The imperfect we'll know because it has the imperfect sheep, ba. And then the future, if it either has bo, bis, bit, bimus, bit is bunt, plus auritur, mur, miniuntur, or in the third and fourth, we have am, as, et, amus, atus, ent, our vowel either A or E. All we're doing is changing out the MST mustus sunt for auritur, mur, mini, untur. If that sounds confusing, then we can talk about that and go over that again in class. But if you spend 5 or 10 minutes looking at this chart, hopefully that should be pretty clear for you. Let's look at some examples. Again, active on the left, passive on the right. An active sentence, in coli omnia agunt, whereas passive is ab in colis omnia agunt. Here's a translation. The first one, the tenants are doing everything, but the passive sentence, everything is being done by the tenants. So what happens? We have our active verb, are doing, becomes passive and is translated is being done. Those are both present. The subject of the active sentence, in coli, tenants, becomes this agent in the passive sentence. Everything is being done by the tenants. In Latin, we're going to call that an ablative of agent. Obviously, it's going to go in the ablative case, as you can see here. In colis is ablative, and it's always going to be preceded by the preposition a or ab, which means by. So passive sentences with a passive verb are almost always going to be accompanied by this ablative of agent, so that we know who's doing the verb. That's the agent, obviously. That's why we call it that. Let's look at another example. Matres infantes efferunt is the mothers carry out the babies. The passive sentence, infantes a matribus efferuntur, the babies are carried out by the mothers. We can see the same thing working in these two sentences that we just saw above. are verbs. Efferunt is active. It means carry out. Efferuntur is passive. Are carried out. The only difference, NT versus NTUR. In the active sentence, our subject is mothers. So to make it passive, since they're doing the action, they're going to become that ablative of agent. There we go. Matres becomes a matribus. Again, this ablative of agent. Also notice, infantes in the active sentence is the direct object. It's accusative. In the passive sentence, it's actually the nominative subject. Now, both the forms are the same, an ES ending, but on the left it's accusative, on the right it's nominative. So we see where a subject in an active sentence, a direct object in an active sentence becomes the subject in a passive sentence. Another switch. And that gives us a basic dichotomy like this: active and passive, subject, direct object. A direct object in an active sentence becomes the subject of a passive sentence, and the subject of an active sentence becomes the ablative of agent in a passive sentence. Here's two more examples, both active and passive, for some sentences, and this would be a good time to pause the video and see how you can find the same things working in these two sentences. Verbs changing from active to passive, subjects becoming ablatives of agent, and direct objects becoming subjects in a passive sentence. So go ahead, pause the video for a few seconds, see if you can figure out how that's going to work without any animation this time. So that's basically it for passive voice in verbs. For some more practice, I highly recommend looking at exercises 30C and 30D on page 25. We'll do some of these in class, but again, the more you do on your own, the better you're going to understand this topic.